Mr. Secretary-General, what a pleasure to see you again.
It's a great pleasure to be back to work with you.
Thank you so much, sir. I understand you are here for the China-Africa Forum. Now, what is the significance as the Secretary-General you see in China and Africa, 2.6 billion people walking hand in hand and working hand in hand?
Well, it's absolutely crucial. First of all, Africa is a continent that was a double victim of colonialism. First, because of the impact of colonialism in itself, and second, because as the global governance institutions, the UN, the Bretton Woods system, were created after the Second World War, most of the African countries were not yet existing. They were under colonial rule. And so Africa was not sufficiently represented in our global system. And this is particularly serious in the economic and financial dimensions, which means that in today's world, China faces a dramatic economic and financial situation to be able to respond to the needs of their people and to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. They have many countries drowning in debt, they have not enough concessional funding, and the international financial architecture that was created after the Second World War was not created to take sufficiently into account the interests and needs of developing countries. Developing countries are underrepresented. Africa is underrepresented. And so, on one hand, one needs to reform the international financial system to make it correspond to today's economy and to properly benefit developing countries. But on the other hand, in this context, because the Chinese-Africa cooperation is the symbol of South-South cooperation, and because China is having an extremely important role in the investment that Africa needs to do to overcome its gaps in infrastructure, its gaps in education, its gaps in health, and the cooperation with China represents an extremely important opportunity for the African continent.
Over the past few weeks, I've been trying to talk to African leaders about their views on cooperation between China and Africa and their views about the UN and the world. And many of them say that they hope with the ideas of Global South and the development of South-South cooperation, there can be a new momentum. Mr. Secretary-General, how do you see the roles of China, Africa, for example, these developing emerging economy, Global South, in achieving the SDGs? I know we are lagging behind, the world is, but what are going to be their role in your vision?
First of all, the reason why we fight for the reform of the international financial system, the reason why we fight for effective debt relief, the reason why we fight for much more concessional funding to the African countries is exactly because we want Africa to accelerate in the implementation of the SDGs. What we see is as China has aligned its global development initiative with the Sustainable Development Goals, the Chinese cooperation, I'm sure, will be a very important instrument in supporting African countries exactly in the implementation of the Agenda 2030.
We have been seeing from the United Nations, you personally even trying to make the commitment and push countries forward in terms of sustainable development goals. For example, about energy transition, which is so crucial. Mr. Secretary-General, you and your colleagues have been working with governments to design the goals for the 2050, for example, particularly recently. How are we going to implement them? What are some of the consensus after you're traveling almost 20 days on the road that you see among economies and countries?
No, we are not yet moving as fast as we should. We must absolutely keep the growth of temperature at 1.5 degrees until the end of the century. I think we'll have some overshooting in the next few years, so it's absolutely essential to limit as much as possible that overshooting and to make it disappear as quickly as possible. But the truth is that emissions are still growing. So it's vital to have a drastic reduction of emissions in this decade. It is vital to move into the progressive phase out of fossil fuels, and it is vital to increase the investments in renewables and the transformation of the economies and the societies. And there are two very important things that are happening in China. One is, of course, the massive investment in renewables. You reached already the target for 2030. And the second is the huge multiplication of electric cars, in which now you produce more electric cars.
You saw them on the road today, right?
Cars. Yeah. Having said so, China, because of the dimension of your economy, and because obviously you became, to a large extent, the factory of the world, China has also a huge effort to make in reduction of emissions in the next few years. And we trust the determination of China to play that role. At the same time, it is very important to say, and we saw it in President Xi's intervention in the Belt and Road, that green development is a fundamental objective in the development cooperation of China with African countries. And we see it again in the present summit, the importance that is attributed by China to the sustainable development and to the green development as a fundamental vector of that cooperation.
We see as the world changes, there are different ideas as to how the earlier rules can be abided by and whether there can be updates of the global rules. But at the same time, more self-interest as well. For example, about this, what you consider as a very crucial energy transition. We see different governments are having very different decisions, and sometimes the pace of movement can be delayed by one country's national interest, while their consensus can be harder to be reached. Mr. Secretary General, how optimistic do you have to be in your daily work?
Jean Monnet used to say he was not optimistic nor pessimistic, he was determined.
Okay.
And I'm determined to convince all governments that the most important national interest is to defeat climate change. I was in Shanghai. The secretary of the party in Shanghai was explaining to me that meaningful investment is already being made to protect in relation to the rising sea level. When I was in the Pacific, the rising sea level was a major concern. I saw communities that had to move from the coast further inland, with destruction taking place at coastal areas. Some islands might even disappear. So, I mean, we are facing climate change as the existential threat of our time, and the interest, the national interest of each country is to make sure we defeat climate change and we do not let our planet to be destroyed.
I know you and your colleagues are busy preparing for the Summit of the Future 2024. What do you consider, Mr. Secretary General, that can be some of the ideas that you can work with those national leaders coming to the meeting this year? What kind of opportunity does it present?
Well, a few things are essential. Discussing about reform of the international financial system is an area where I believe the Chinese government is also deeply interested. To have a UN role in the global governance of artificial intelligence. The idea that artificial intelligence should not be for the club of the rich countries. It needs to be something for all countries in the world. And it's not by chance that China presented to the General Assembly of the United Nations a resolution that was approved unanimously for capacity building in developing countries. We must make sure that artificial intelligence is for all, not only for the rich. Any emergency platform that we would like to discuss in order to give us more conditions in the future when there are future pandemics to respond more effectively. A new agenda for peace, betting a lot on the root causes of peace. Development is an essential instrument to consolidate peace, but there are many other areas in the new agenda for peace. On the other hand, an enormous effort in order to create the conditions for developing countries to have access to the resources they need to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. Last year we had a summit on the SDGs. Yes. This year we have a summit not on the what, but on the how. How can we reform the international governance system to make sure the SDGs become possible to reach for the most vulnerable countries in the world?
Next year is going to be the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. I know you and your colleagues are preparing for that. From now till then, Mr. Secretary General, how would you call on the national leaders around the world to work with you and people around the world?
My biggest appeal is for peace. Peace is the most important thing in life. It's peace in our minds, peace in our communities, peace in the world. We see so many other parts of the world in which people are killing each other, in which destruction is, and in which people are suffering so much. Peace is the most precious gift, and we must fight for peace.
Mr. Secretary General, you see China has been confirming the reform and opening policy. Meanwhile, you also see this country has been working with the United Nations, bringing out global development, global security, global civilization initiatives. China is to celebrate a big anniversary coming in October 1st. Now, how do you see the importance of continued success of this, what it considers as the largest developing country in the world? How much do you see the takeaways of China can be of reference to the global South?
Now, China was able to eradicate extreme poverty. China is still a developing country, but China is in the top performance of some of the most sophisticated areas of technology. And so I believe that to study what China has done, to learn with the Chinese process, is something that would be very important. Of course, no one size fits all. Countries are different, but it's an experience that all developing countries should study to see to what extent they can profit from that experience to overcome their dramatic development gaps.
Of course, coming month will be China's big anniversary. Is there something you want to share with the Chinese people?
Well, congratulations, and that this should represent a moment of deep commitment of China, a renewed deep commitment of China with multilateralism and with the UN, which represents two traditional ways of China to assert itself in the world.
Mr. Secretary General, I know you have a very busy schedule for the rest of the day, but your general takeaway from your trip in China so far?
Well, I have to say that I had an extraordinary benefit. First, to travel in the fastest train in the world, the magnetic train, yes. And second, to be able also to use your high-speed train from Shanghai to Beijing, and so to witness what has been the extraordinary development of infrastructure in this country as an absolutely essential tool for its development.
Mr. Secretary General, as always, what a pleasure, and thank you for the honor for giving me the opportunity to have a conversation with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.